Hello and welcome. I am your host, Sarah Cannon, and this podcast is on the mysteries that remain in Baalbek. This podcast will explore the ancient site of Baalbek, known to be one of the largest and longest building projects in the Levant, and home to one of the largest Roman temples found anywhere in the world. The site has been built upon by numerous cultures throughout history, and some believe it has been used as a religious site dating back to as early as 10,000 BCE. The megaliths located at the site have raised many conspiracies and baffled researchers for centuries. Some say it's the work from the Romans, while others claim the stones were from a much previous time. Baalbek has survived fires, earthquakes, bombings, a massive flood, and tons of human destruction, but not without suffering extensive damage. This podcast will explore what we know about Baalbek and the mysteries that are yet to be unraveled. I had the privilege of visiting Baalbek in November of 2019. While I didn't know much about the site at the time of my visit, it left me in a state of wonder, which has sparked my interest to learn more about this amazing archaeological site. To give you an idea just how grand the site is, look to the bottom of the photo to find my husband and me. Baalbek is located in modern-day Lebanon, around 53 miles northeast of Beirut and between the Lebanon and Anti-Lebanon mountains. It is situated around 3,700 feet above sea level in the fertile Bekaa Valley. The two historic rivers, the Latanti and the Orontes, flowed into the Bekaa Valley in opposite directions. This abundant source of fresh water and the natural setting of the area was likely the impetus for the religious site. The name Baalbek is of Phoenician origin and dates back to the 3rd century BCE. The religious site of Baalbek, however, is believed to have predated its Phoenician given name. The German Archaeological Institute has found an ancient sacred mound in the inner chamber of the Temple of Jupiter that dates back to at least 10,000 BCE. Archaeologists have uncovered layers from the Neolithic settlements, likely from the pre-pottery Neolithic time, which would date Baalbek close to the time when Göbekli Tepe was thriving in Turkey. The supreme deity of the Phoenicians was El, the sun god. Asherah, the goddess of fertility, was El's companion. It is believed worshippers were not permitted to pray directly to the couple, but could use their son Baal as their mediator. Baal was believed to be the Semitic god of thunder and storms, and the bringer of rain. Baal was often worshipped with his consort, Asarte, queen of heaven. The Phoenician god Baal was likely the precursor to Zeus and Jupiter. The Phoenician name Baalbek is believed to be translated as God of the Bekaa Valley. Let's take a look at the known inhabitants of Baalbek and what mark they left. The Phoenician name was used by the Greeks to refer to the people from Canaan and dates back to the 1st millennium BCE. The Phoenicians referenced the land of Canaan located in the Levant as a region that roughly corresponded to Phoenicia. The Phoenicians are believed to be descendants of the Canaanites and may have referred to themselves as Canaanites. Fun fact, while I clearly received my mom's Scotch-Irish genes, my father's family comes from Hamana, Lebanon, which is about an hour's drive from Baalbek. My last name, Cannon, has been anglicized and was previously Canaan. Our family in Lebanon writes it in Roman letters as shown in this photo. This is believed to be a very old last name in Lebanon, reference to the people of Canaan. The land of Canaan, or Phoenicia, was never a unified kingdom, but independent city-states. Its city-states began to form around 3200 BCE and were fully established by 2750 BCE. By at least 3000 BCE, the prominent cities of Tyre, Byblos, Sidon, Arwad, and Berat were prosperous trading hubs. The Phoenicians' location was at the nexus, linking Asia, North Africa, and Europe. The Phoenicians were maritime traders and colonizers. They were skilled in shipbuilding, glass-making, productions of dyes, and manufacture of luxury and common goods. The maritime Canaanites manufactured a purple dye from murex shells in the city of Tyre. The dye would stain their skin, which led to the Greeks calling them the Phoenicians, which translates to the purple people. The cedars of Lebanon, along with their famous purple dye, were their most prized exports. Their other exports included pine wood, fine linen, embroiders, wine, metalwork, glass, tin glazed pottery, salt, and dried fish. Phoenician artifacts have been found as far as Britain. The Phoenicians developed an alphabetic script of 22 letters, and it is believed to have been used in Byblos as early as the 15th century BCE. The Greeks, who had no alphabet of their own, adopted the Phoenician alphabet, and it later evolved into the modern Roman alphabet we use today. The first significant construction at Baalbek was credited to the Phoenicians. The religious site was centered on a natural rock fissure around 15 meters deep, where a small rock-cut altar was built. Another altar was built above it on a hill for easier access. Its location was an important waypoint on the Phoenician trade route from Tyre to Damascus. The first written evidence of Baalbek was when Alexander encountered the city on his way through Bakah to Damascus. Little is known about what significant structures, if any, the Phoenicians built in Baalbek. In 332 BCE, at the end of the late classical period, Alexander the Great conquered the Levant and Syria. At the time, Alexander was spreading the ideals of Greek civilization to every region he visited. Alexander encountered the city on his way to Damascus and renamed the city Heliopolis, or City of the Sun. The name comes from Helios, Greek for sun, and polis for city. Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE and gave rise to the Hellenistic period, which lasted between 323 to 331 BCE. Alexander's 4 generals took over the empire after his death and heavily influenced various regions with Greek thought and culture. One of his generals, Seleucus, became king of the eastern provinces, and the area became known as the Seleucid Empire. While Baalbek was part of the Greek territory for around 268 years, there is no supporting evidence or documentation of Greek architecture at Baalbek. Around the 4th century BCE, the Roman Republic became conquest-oriented, with special interest on the Mediterranean. Rome took over Greece in 146 BCE, and after its conquest of Carthage on the north coast of Africa, Rome assumed uncontested control over the Mediterranean basin. In 64 BCE, Pompey the Great annexed Syria and ended the Seleucid Empire, making Baalbek part of the Roman Empire. In 46 BCE, Julius Caesar founded a Roman colony in Heliopolis, and the Roman construction in Baalbek began. The Romans had similar gods to the Greeks and kept the Greek name Heliopolis. The Romans connected Baal to the god Jupiter and the goddess Astarte with Venus. The Romans built much of what Baalbek consists of today. They had ongoing construction in Baalbek for over 2.5 centuries. They added massive building projects, walkways, aqueducts, and roads. The Temple of Jupiter is the largest temple in Baalbek and the single largest religious edifice ever erected by the Romans. There are opposing thoughts of when the temple was constructed. Some say construction began around 15 BC and ended around the beginning of the 3rd century CE. Others claim construction wasn't started until the 1st century CE during the reign of Emperor Augustus and was completed around 60 AD. When I was in Baalbek, the descriptions at the site make reference to the temple being constructed during the 1st century CE. It was built upon previous settlements that date back to the Neolithic, Bronze, Iron Age, and the Hellenistic period. The Temple of Jupiter consists of a cella built on a 12-meter-high podium and a courtyard surrounded by a colonnaded portico. Although previously planned, the monumental entrance, the propylaea, semicircular forecourt, and hexagonal court weren't added until the 2nd and 3rd century CE. The sanctuary was located on a 7-meter-high podium. There were underground galleries that were believed to be used as cool rooms in the summer. The temple was lined with 104 19-meter-high rose granite columns from Aswan, Egypt, with an interior temple containing 50 additional columns. It is not certain how the columns arrived at Baalbek, but it is believed they were quarried in Aswan, floated down the Nile, rafted across the Mediterranean Sea, and hauled over the Lebanon mountains. Some of the columns have been destroyed over time, and 8 were taken to the Hagia Sophia. Only 6 rose granite columns remain at the Temple of Jupiter today. This head of a lion or gargoyle is believed to have been placed at intervals to drain the rainwater off the roof. In Roman times, lions were thought to have represented strength, sovereignty, and justice. The swastika symbols shown in the design below is an ancient symbol that dates back to modern-day Ukraine as long as 15,000 years ago. The Phoenicians thought to have referred to the swastika as a sacred symbol of the sun, while the Romans were believed to have used the swastika as a symbol of the lightning bolt, depicting the god Jupiter. While I was in Baalbek, I came across these really interesting geometric patterns found in some of the ruins. While I thought they were steeped in meaning, I haven't been able to find any significance or symbolism to these designs. The propylaea is the monumental staircase that leads from the semicircular forecourt to the entrance hall of the temple. It consists of a long rectangular hall that had a row of 12 columns at each side. It is believed to have been decorated with bronze and gold during the 3rd century, making this impressive entrance seen from afar. The hexagonal court is the only example in Roman architecture. It was the most recent addition to the Temple of Jupiter. It served as the forecourt to the Great Court. The Great Court, measuring 135 meters by 113 meters, is located in the center of the temple. It's believed to have been built upon an ancient settlement and older sanctuary. The remains are hidden under the high podium, of which contained a colonnaded portico. The court was surrounded by 128 rose granite columns, also known to have been quarried in Aswan, Egypt. Non-Roman features of the temple include 2 high altars that were believed to have been where sacrifices were offered, and 2 water basins at the front of the temple. The altars and wash basins were thought to have been used for local religious traditions, in addition to Roman rites. 4 circular exedra were located in the Great Court. One of the best preserved Roman temples in the world is the Temple of Bacchus. Unlike the Temple of Jupiter, this temple was completely finished. The temple is 69 meters long by 36 meters wide and surrounded by 42 columns that are 19 meters in height. The Corinthian ornaments found on the temple suggest it was built in the late 2nd century. While it is not known for certain, the temple was likely dedicated to the Roman wine goddess Bacchus. A large staircase leads up to the stone podium where the temple and the colonnaded portico stand. The anticella was ornamented with 2 rows where statues once stood. Another staircase leads from the anticella to the cella. This staircase was separated from the anticella by a canopy-like structure because common visitors of the temple were not allowed to look inside the Holy of Holies. To the right of the cella, there's a crypt where it is believed cult vessels were stored. Some of the intricate detail in this temple appeared to be vines and poppy flowers, giving evidence that the temple was in fact dedicated to Bacchus. A mosaic of Bacchus was also found at the temple. Although not much has been revealed about when and where it was discovered, its presence gives more evidence that this temple was in fact dedicated to the wine god. This temple's ornamentation of seashells, doves, and other artistic motifs led European visitors to associate this temple with the goddess of Venus. Venus is known as the goddess of fertility and is the symbol of prosperity. She is believed to be the protector of the city. This circular temple was built in the 3rd century CE. The cella on the exterior is ornamented by columns attached to a scalloped entablature, creating a dynamic play between the round and rectangular geometries. While this building is the smallest temple at Baalbek, it shows the Romans' willingness to experiment with different architectural forms. A colonnaded street separated the Temple of Venus from the main Roman complex. The temple has remained well preserved as it was used as a church by the Greek Catholics and dedicated to the early Christian martyr Saint Barbara. The Temple of Mercury is located on Sheikhan Abdallah Hill. While the only remains include its staircase carved from rock, this temple is believed to have been dedicated to Mercury, the god of trade. In 324, Constantine the Great came into power. Christianity had reached Rome and pagan worship was suppressed. This was likely what ended the Roman construction of Baalbek and started its devastation. Beginning in the 5th century, Baalbek received continuous battering by numerous rulers. Natural disasters, including a massive flood and 3 earthquakes, also led to Baalbek's destruction. By the time the Ottoman Empire took Baalbek in 1516, the temples were completely ruined and the city was largely ignored. In 1751, English architect Robert Wood visited Baalbek. His drawings showed 9 of the original 54 columns of the Temple of Jupiter still intact. But after the earthquake in 1759, Baalbek was left with only 6 columns, the number that remains today. In 1898, German Emperor Wilhelm II visited Baalbek and the site piqued his interest. He sent a team of archaeologists to the site where they have skillfully worked and restored to preserve Baalbek. Baalbek has been studied continuously since 1898, except for the years 1975 through 1990, which was during the Lebanese Civil War. The extensive damage in Baalbek is what makes this site hard to unravel and construction dates extremely difficult to place. It is amazing what the German archaeologist team has been able to put back together. While there's been a lot of controversy on who built what, the most controversial discussion involves 3 large megaliths located beneath the Temple of Jupiter. The largest stones are located at the Temple of Jupiter's foundation. Jupiter's courtyard is resting on a platform known as the Grand Terrace. This is made up of a huge outer wall and a filling of massive stones. The large part of the outer wall has 9 large, precisely cut and crafted blocks, ranging from 30 to 33 feet in length, 14 feet in height, and 10 feet in depth, each weighing around 450 tons. 9 of these blocks are visible on the north side of the temple, 9 on the south, and 6 on the west. They form a gigantic U-shaped wall. It is possible more blocks exist under the areas of the Grand Terrace, but it is yet to be excavated. On the western side above the 6 blocks, there are 3 even more massive stones. These are known as the trilithon. These blocks vary in size between 63 and 65 feet in length, a height of 14.5 feet, and a depth of 12 feet. They are believed to weigh over 800 tons each. These megaliths were placed more than 20 feet high. Before we get deeper into the myths of these large stones, it's important to talk about the other megaliths found in a quarry about a half a mile from Baalbek. The first megalith discovered is known by 2 different names. They translate to the stone of the pregnant woman or the stone of the south. Its dimensions are 69 feet by 16 feet by 13 feet 10 inches. It is believed to weigh around 1,000 tons. This stone was found at an angle with its lowest section still attached to the quarry rock, as though it were almost ready to be cut free and transported. The German Archaeological Institute found a crack in the stone of the pregnant woman, which would have prevented it from being transported. We have enough to talk about in this podcast that I'm not going to go into the myths surrounding its name. A second stone was discovered nearby in the 1970s and is believed to weigh around 1,200 tons. It was extracted deeper into the earth than the stone of the pregnant woman and has a higher quality of stone. If the stone of the pregnant woman did in fact have a fissure that prevented its movement, it would make sense that one would extract deeper into the earth to get a stronger stone. There are several blocks measuring around 1.5 by 1 meter that were extracted most likely after the stone was abandoned. A third stone was recently discovered in 2014 next to the stone of the pregnant woman and is believed to exceed 1,200 tons, but its size and weight are only estimates as it's not yet been fully excavated. Jean-Pierre Adam, an architect with the French National Center for Scientific Research, believes the stones were hollowed out from the rocky mass below and rollers were set in place. Once the stones were placed on rollers, Adam thinks the capstans attached to pulley blocks placed symmetrically on both sides of the load ensured the slow progress of the enormous block. He thinks 16 machines were used, and each machine was operated by 32 men, which accumulated to 512 men needed to move the stone. The German Archaeological Institute also believes that capstans could have been used to transport the stones or through the use of a sledge. There is evidence of holes in the megaliths that may have been used to attach ropes and fix the capstans. It is not clear where these holes were found in the massive megaliths, as the photos do not include the entire stone. The only evidence that a capstan could have been used is from the circular trace of wear discovered on a rock surface. The photos showing the hole in the megalith and the circular trace of wear do not show this evidence in the massive megaliths. While I was visiting Baalbek, I noticed these holes in the large stones on the north wall, but I didn't notice any on the trilithon. Cultural anthropologist Martin Gray acknowledges that various scholars believe the stones were laboriously dragged from the nearby quarries to the temple site, but he argues that their method of quarrying, transportation, and precise placement is beyond the technological ability of any known ancient or modern builders. Gray points out that while there are carved images in the Temple of Egypt and Mesopotamia that give evidence to this method of block transportation, the blocks were a tenth of the size and weight of the Baalbek stones and had been moved along a flat surface with wide movement paths. The route from the quarries to the site of Baalbek is uphill over rock and winding terrain, and there is no evidence whatsoever of a flat hauling surface having been created in ancient times. Once the stones were brought to the site, another question arises. How are they lifted and placed so precisely? A common theory is that the stones were raised using a complex array of scaffolding, ramps, and pulleys, which were powered by large numbers of humans and animals working in unison. The Renaissance architect Dominican Fontana used this method to erect a 327-ton Egyptian obelisk in front of St. Peter's Basilica. He used 40 huge pulleys, which required a combined force of 800 men and 140 horses. The area where the obelisk was erected was a great open space that could easily accommodate all the lifting apparatus and the men and horses pulling on the ropes, where at Baalbek, no such space is available. Gray adds that hills slope away from where lifting apparatus would need to have been placed, and there is no evidence that a flat and structurally firm surface was made and then mysteriously removed after the lifting was done. Gray also points out that because these stones were placed side by side, there's simply no conceivable place where a huge pulley apparatus could have been stationed. Gray believes that there are no known lifting technologies, even in the current times, that could raise and position the Baalbek stones to give the amount of working space. A German architect and archaeologist, Daniel Lohmann, believes the trilithon, which is part of the U-shaped megalithic wall surrounding the Temple to Jupiter, is in fact Roman. Others who believe this theory claim the megaliths were left in situ following a change in the contract plan for the podium at the Temple of Jupiter. Martin Gray thinks the massive Baalbek stones were cut and moved before the Romans came to Baalbek. He has found no legends or folk tales from Roman times that link the Romans with the mammoth stones. He also claims there are no records in Roman or other literary sources concerning the construction methods or the dates and names of the benefactors, designers, architects, engineers, and builders of the Great Terrace. Gray also points out the lack of resemblance between the trilithon and the Roman-era constructions above them. There is an extensive evidence of wind and sand erosion in the limestone rock of the trilithon that is absent from Roman temples, giving evidence that the stones could date back to a far earlier age than the temples. Romans were known to build temples on pre-existing sacred sites, and this is certainly the case at Baalbek. We just don't know to what extent. Evidence of an architectural drawing found on the trilithon may give proof that the stones were already in place when the Romans arrived. In the mid-1960s, the top of the trilithon was cleared, exposing an enormous drawing covering almost the entire surface of the stone block. The drawing shows part of the large pediment of the Temple of Jupiter. Professor Kalayan, who was the engineer placed in charge of the restorations of Baalbek by the Lebanese Department of Antiquities, believes this drawing proves the trilithon to have already been in place before the Temple of Jupiter. Lohmann, however, disagrees and believes the trilithon and temple were built at the same time. Lohmann believes the trilithon was constructed by the Romans to hide an older, inconveniently shaped temple terrace. British writer and explorer Graham Hancock argues against this theory, stating that while Romans were amazing builders, it seems unlike them to go through such extreme lengths for purely cosmetic purposes, as the U-shaped wall was not supporting the podium and does not support any part of the Temple of Jupiter. Kalayan took note of another interesting piece of the puzzle. He found part of a drum from a column similar in dimension to the columns of Jupiter, underneath the trilithon. It seemed to be used as a block. Some believe this was a discarded drum, and the columns were already cut when the foundations of the trilithon was started. One would think this evidence would settle the debate that the Romans were in fact the ones who cut, moved, and placed the trilithon. Yet, the story continues. Kalayan has a very old black and white postcard of the west wall that shows a column drum above the trilithon that was redeployed by the Arabs during the many attacks of the fortress. The column drum has since been replaced in recent restorations. The Arabs were known to reuse and repurpose Roman column drums to repair the fortress. This seems the most likely reason a column drum was found underneath the trilithon. Does it make sense that the Romans would have purposely used a column drum at this point in construction, as they would have had plenty of regular blocks? While this information did not lead me to any answers, it led me to the question, if it wasn't the Romans who were responsible for the trilithon, who was? Martin Gray has noticed a resemblance between the trilithon and the Cyclopean stone walls at verifiable pre-Roman sites, such as the Acropolis Foundation in Athens. English traveler C.B. Elliot, who traveled to Baalbek around the 1830s, also connected the trilithon to Cyclopean masonry. Architectural historian Del Upton believes these myths, while intriguing, are preposterous. While Upton is quick to discount this myth, I am left wondering if it was the Greeks during their 268 years at Baalbek who were responsible for the trilithon. At the time the Greeks arrived in Baalbek, they had already built many impressive structures. So while there is no evidence for the Greeks' involvement with the trilithon or much construction at Baalbek, I feel like we can't throw this theory out completely. Other myths involve King Solomon with the help of the jinns, who built it as a palace for Queen of Sheba. Story has it that some of the megaliths were left in the quarry because the jinns went on strike. While this story is filled with fantasy, Graham Hancock has made a connection with the large megaliths of Baalbek to that of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, supposedly built by King Solomon. The Temple Mount contains an enormous megalith known to the Jews as the Foundation. Hancock goes further and connects both of these sites to the megalithic monuments of the Giza Plateau. Egyptianologist Salim Hassan was head of the most detailed investigation on the Giza Plateau in the 1930s. He discovered evidence of a long-term Canaanite settlement that had seemed to be focused on the Sphinx and its megalithic temples. Nothing has been found to explain why they were there or why and when they left. It is believed that the Canaanites were present in Giza between 1543 BC and 1293 BC. However, it's possible their arrival dates even further back. There has been numerous motive stele and other marks of respect to the Great Sphinx of Giza from members of this Canaanite community. The Sphinx was identified with the Egyptian god Horus, who appeared in many forms, but most often as a falcon. The Sphinx in the Canaanite inscriptions is called the Hur or Harun. These are the names of the Canaanite falcon deity. The ancient Egyptians also called the Sphinx Huram Akhet, translating to Horus in the horizon. This name was found to be directly linked through a number of inscriptions to the Canaanite Hurna. This connection was further tied together when French Egyptianologist Zevi Koch found an epithet on a Sphinx statuette indicating that Haran is originally from Lebanon. Furthermore, Baal, the Canaanite deity after who Baalbek is named, also had a cult in Egypt where he was associated with Set, the god of deserts and storms. The sacred city of the ancient Egyptians, Inu, where the temple of the Sphinx was visited by a priesthood of Giza, was also called Heliopolis. As you recall, this is the same name the Greeks used for Baalbek. Could these ties link the Phoenicians to the trilithon? An even further myth springs from the Scottish diplomat David Urquhart, who traveled to Baalbek in 1860 and took interest in the trilithon. During a conversation with the emir of Baalbek, he was told the megalithic work had been done at the command of two different rulers in the primeval period before the flood, and after the flood, it was repaired by Solomon. After passing what was believed to be the tomb of Noah, Urquhart came to the conclusion that the builders of Baalbek must have been the same ones who built the ark, as they seemed more than capable of tackling the feat. Noah's ark was recorded as being a vessel 450 feet long, 75 feet broad, and 45 feet deep. Noah was believed to have come back to the area after the flood to live out the remainder of his days. Urquhart thought the work had been interrupted by the flood, and the megaliths remained after the flood because of their massive size. Ancient legends have spread through Lebanon, claiming that Baalbek is the most ancient building in the world. It was peopled by giants who were punished for their antiquities by the flood. An Arabic manuscript echoes most of Urquhart's story, but instead of Solomon rebuilding Baalbek, it was Nimrod, the great grandson of Noah, who supposedly sent giants to repair the damaged walls. While these myths seem a little far-fetched, the connections they make are fascinating. So where are we left? We are left back at Baalbek, an ancient site that has captivated people for thousands of years. Most of what we see today is credited to the highly skilled Romans and the German archaeological team for restoring Baalbek after its destruction. While little is known of the Phoenician and Greeks' architectural contributions to Baalbek, these people probably played an important role in preserving Baalbek as a religious site and gave the Romans reason to build their magnificent temples. While excavations are still going on, the many mysteries of Baalbek remain and may always remain.